If you're working long hours or coming home too exhausted to do anything else, stay tuned. This session is about rest, time that is built into working life for the benefit of both workers and employers. Now, I must tell you that I lost a lot of sleep preparing this, but as I learn, I'll get more rest. In our society, hard work is respected, but the law makes it clear that rest isn't the opposite of hard work. It's an essential part of it. Here in Namibia, rest is a legal right protected by law. Many people work long hours under tough conditions. Rest promotes health, good health, reduces stress, helps prevent exploitation, and creates space for family and community life. Just as importantly, it supports better focus, greater creativity, and more productive, sustainable work. In this two-part series, Rest and Leave, we'll look at how rest time and leave days are set out in Namibian labor law as essential parts of working life. Today, we will talk about rest periods during the workday, between work days, weekly days off on Sundays and public holidays, and how night work is treated. In our last session, when we spoke about overtime, I told you about the limitations in our law on the number of hours that an employer may assign an employee to work in one work week. These are 9 ordinary daily working hours for a 5-day week, 8 ordinary daily working hours for a 6-day week, and 45 ordinary working hours for a 45-hour week. In addition, the limit is 3 overtime hours per day, or a total of 10 overtime hours per week. Now, there are some exceptions, which I didn't talk about, but I'll tell you now. The limits that I talked about do not apply in the case of security guards or emergency health personnel. The limit on their work is a 12-hour day or a 60-hour ordinary work week. Also, urgent work does not apply in the case of overtime. A person can continue working where there's urgent work. Now, urgent work means if it's not attended to, will threaten someone's health or their life or cause serious damage to property. All right? That's urgent work. It's also work that is connected with the arrival, departure, unloading, maintenance, fueling of a ship, an airplane, if it's used to transport passengers, livestock, or perishable goods. In addition to this, where people are dealing with the general public, it's okay for them to work an extra 15 minutes because they're serving customers. If they work more than 15 minutes, then they have to be paid as overtime. Now, I'm going to talk about the kind of breaks that are required. First of all, meal breaks. During the workday, all workers are entitled to a 1-hour meal break after 5 hours of work. What do they do then? Whatever they want to. Eat, socialize, take care of personal business, including picking up kids at school, even take a nap. But if this doesn't fit into, if your needs do not fit into the employer's schedule, like you have to pick up your kids at a time other than your scheduled work break, try to work it out with the employer. Maybe you can put you a break at another time, your meal break. Or if it doesn't work out, then you'll have to make other arrangements. Now, the meal break is an hour. The employer and the employee may agree to a shorter meal break, but not less than a half an hour. In such a case, according to the Labor Act, the employer must notify the executive director of the Ministry of Justice and Labor Relations about this reduced meal break. Employers are entitled to assign a longer meal break of up to 90 minutes. Now, mind you, the meal break does not count as time worked. You don't get paid for it. It's just a rest time. If the employer says, I'm giving you a longer break than 90 minutes, they have to start paying you as if you're working after that 90 minutes. Now, employers may not assign or permit an employee to work during the lunch break. Let's be clear about that. That means even if you want to work during the lunch break, the law doesn't permit it. All right? If you're a truck driver and you have to keep track of a truck, that doesn't count as work. You can do that on your lunch break. The lunch break provision does not apply to security guards. Now, can these provisions that I've talked about be changed? Yes, they can be. We'll talk about this later when we talk about variations. But as I said, meal breaks are not counted as time worked. Here is an example. If a worker is scheduled for an ordinary 9-hour workday and they start at 7 a.m., they have a 1-hour lunch break at noon and continue from 1 p.m. until 5 p.m., that is their 9-hour workday. They actually will have started work 10 hours before they conclude. It's a long day, isn't it? Now, I want to talk about whether you can take off time during the workday. Workers, please be clear. You are expected to work during your scheduled working hours. You have no right to take off during the workday, whatever the reason, unless you can work it out with your employer. This is strictly between you and your employer if you want to take off extra time. So, if you are a worker and you want to take time off, discuss it with your employer. I mentioned already, you could propose to adjust your lunch hour. This might be difficult in some cases. For example, if you're a nanny or a security guard, the employer may not be able to agree to adjust it. In some cases, the employer may agree if you tell the employer, I have someone else who will cover for me when I take off. In any case, if the employer agrees, you have to make it clear whether you're going to be paid for that time you've taken off during the workday or whether pay will be deducted from your daily pay. Now, there's a limit on work that can be how much work you're allowed to do or how much work can be assigned during a 24-hour period. There's a term in the law called spread over. You don't have to know about it. The spread over is the time you start working, then you count 24 hours after that. A worker can only work 12 hours during that 24-hour cycle. The only exception is in the case of urgent work. The law also requires a consecutive rest period during a 7-hour week. What I mean by that is you have to be given at least 36 consecutive hours of rest within a 7-day work week. Now, in many cases, this is on the weekends, but some workers are scheduled to work during weekends. This 36 consecutive hours can be during the week. Now, there are variations on this arrangement we'll discuss later, where there are continuous shifts in mining, fishing, and in some other industries. But that's the general rule. You must have 36 hours of consecutive rest. Now, let's talk about work on Sundays and work on public holidays. Sundays and public holidays are legally protected as rest days. Employers may not schedule employees to work on Sundays or public holidays, except in the case of urgent work. I think we now know what urgent work is, or where the employer is carrying on a business of a shop, a hotel, or a hostel that lawfully operates on a Sunday, where the worker is performing domestic work in a private household, in health and social welfare social welfare care and residential facilities, including hospices, orphanages, and old age homes. I think it's obvious why people have to work nonstop in these places. Work on a farm if it is required to be done on that day. And I mentioned continuous shifts, or the permanent secretary can approve other activities where workers can be assigned or can be allowed to work on Sundays or public holidays. When they work on these public holidays, they get double pay, all right? They get their regular basic pay and another period of a number of hours that they work extra. There's an alternate provision in the law. The employer, rather than paying double time, could, if the worker agrees, give the worker time off during the succeeding week, equivalent to the time they worked on Sunday or public holiday, and pay them at the rate of time and a half for that time off. That's an alternative. Now, if employers want to assign employees to work on Sundays and public holidays, they may apply to the permanent secretary. That's in the cases other than the ones that I've mentioned where the law allows it. If they make an application, it would be important to consult the employees and get their agreement. Now I'm going to talk about night work. Employees who work at night between the hours of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. are entitled to 8% extra pay. In a sense, it's a compensation for losing rest that you might otherwise have. The law forbids pregnant workers from being to do this work at night either 8 weeks before their expected due date or 8 weeks after giving birth. The employer cannot assign them to work at night, and they are not allowed to work at night. There's a Labor Amendment Act, which is probably going to come up in the future, where additional protections will be given to workers who work at night, including transport. All right? Now, I want to talk about the variations and exemptions. And this has to do with the law having to be flexible and fair and making a balance between workers and employers. Not all jobs can operate on the same schedule. So in a sense, you could say, as far as the law is concerned, one size may not fit all. The Labor Act recognizes this and allows for an employer to apply for exemptions or variations regarding rest and working time provisions, the ones I've been talking about. I want to tell you that the provisions of the law that I have discussed are part of what is called the basic conditions of employment in the Labor Act. They are a part of your contract of employment. Now, an exemption means an application that provision should not apply at all. A variation means that it'll apply, the protection may apply, but it will be, the contents will be changed to reorganize or reconfigure what the protection is. To give you an example, there was a time when the tourism industry applied for an exemption and variation of the Labor Act. And this operated very, very successfully for some period of time. It was very precise. It didn't throw out the whole Labor Act. It zeroed in on what are the problems in running for example, a game lodge. One is that there's usually a long break during the day, either for the guests to rest, and also because the animals are not visible during certain times of day. So the employer wanted to organize its business in such a way that employees had a long break in the middle of the day. That's a variation, all right? In the case of variations and exemptions, the employer must apply for the minister's approval, consult the employees and present their views, and basically find a way to preserve the content of the protection or alternatives which still protect workers. That means they must still get rest, breaks, and fair pay, maybe not exactly in the way the law is written. The employer must ensure schedules that are safe and reasonable. And also, the employers can negotiate with trade unions, where there are trade unions, for these kind of variations. But the variations that are in an agreement cannot override the Act's basic protections. You cannot negotiate your way out of the basic conditions of employment. If there is an agreement like that, which, for example, says employees will not take lunch or employees will work 16 hours a day, just an agreement without having gone and gotten an exemption or a variation, those agreements are not enforceable, and employees who sue for their pay, who go to the labor inspector or the labor commissioner, the employer cannot defend on the basis that, well, they agreed to it. You can't agree to what is not allowed. Now, if the laws are not honored, what can be done? For the workers, speak to the trade union if one represents you at work. Speak to your employer respectfully. If that doesn't work, complain to a labor inspector at the Ministry of Justice and Labor Relations. And if that doesn't work, you could refer a complaint to the labor commissioner. Now, I want to leave you with certain key points to remember concerning rest and leave. Rest is a legal right and it is essential for good work and health. Most workers work 8 to 9 hours per day. That's their ordinary working hours, a 45-hour week maximum, and there are certain limits on overtime, which I mentioned. Meal breaks are mandatory after 5 hours of work. They generally are 60 minutes. They can be reduced down to 30 minutes by agreement. Everyone must get at least 36 consecutive hours of rest per week. Work on Sunday and public holidays is generally not permitted, but in the industries or the circumstances where it is permitted, employees are entitled to extra pay and or compensatory time. Night work gets extra pay, and some workers, that is pregnant women, are not allowed to do night work. Flexibility is allowed, but rights cannot be ignored. A lot of these things can be solved if the workers and the employers can speak to each other. A good working relationship will actually enable both of you to implement these laws in a way that works to your advantage. Workers, if the rules are not followed, speak up. Go through the channels that you have respectfully, and you'll get somewhere. Rest is not about relaxing. It's about protecting people and supporting strong workplaces. What should we take away? When a worker rests well, everyone benefits, including employers and families. Let's make rest a normal, respected part of our work life in Namibia. Thank you for listening. Please share this podcast. Thank you. Bye-bye.